Tallahassee police make a stunning announcement just 2 hours ago. Lori Paige's remains were found in Thomas County. She was last seen in 2023, and in the following days, weeks, and months, flyers and posters went up. The FBI raising the stakes on the search, putting up billboards and offering a reward. People all across the area asking the same question: where is Lori?
It was April of 2025 when investigators returned to a remote plantation in Thomas County, Georgia. The ground had recently been cleared by a prescribed burn, brush, and debris reduced to ash, the landscape stripped bare in a way that revealed what had been hidden for nearly 2 years. Among the blackened soil and tangled roots, detectives discovered human remains. 4 days later, tests confirmed what many in Tallahassee had feared and prayed against since June of 2023. The remains belonged to 12-year-old Lori Paige, a middle schooler who had vanished without a trace. At a press conference, Tallahassee Police Chief Lawrence Revel stood before the community and reminded them of the promise he had made at the beginning. "I told you 2 years ago we would never give up. I told you 2 years ago we would find Lori and we would bring her home. I told you 2 years ago we would find who did this and we would arrest them and bring them to justice." The words carried weight because the man accused of taking Lori's life was not a stranger, not a neighbor, not an outsider. It was her own father, Andrew Wiley, the same man who had called police on June 3, 2023, to report his daughter missing. But why would a father harm his child? What really happened in the days between June 1st and June 3rd, when Lori was last seen alive and when Andrew first dialed 911? And how did nearly 2 years of searching, questioning, and waiting finally lead back to him? What unfolded next would not only shatter that promise of stability, but also reveal the depth of human wickedness and how sometimes the greatest danger does not come from strangers in the shadows, but from those closest to our hearts. But before we begin, if you find this video interesting, please give it a like at the end and tell me what you think about the case. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe for more. Thank you. This video is created solely for educational and documentary purposes. It does not endorse, glorify, or condone any of the criminal actions or individuals described in this case. Viewer discretion is advised. Lori Annalise Paige was born on April 14, 2011, to 22-year-old Andrew Wiley and 17-year-old Miranda White. From the very beginning, her life carried the weight of instability. Her grandmother, Lori Paige, later described her as a bright child who seemed unusually self-sufficient for her age. She could read by the time she was 4, and she never caused trouble in the home. She was quiet and reserved, often shy around adults, but with friends she came alive, especially when talking about the things she loved: Roblox, YouTube videos, and the little worlds she created for herself when she needed an escape. But Brooklyn also described how Lori's early years were shadowed by her mother's indifference. Miranda had wanted to end the pregnancy late, and when she couldn't, she moved on as though motherhood had been forced upon her. She left Lori alone for long stretches of time, sometimes sleeping through the day and leaving food on low shelves so her daughter could fend for herself. And when Brooklyn moved to Tampa to be closer, she was stunned to see how little supervision Miranda provided. Friends and relatives noticed the same thing. There was never really a bond between Miranda and her daughter, so it was often others who stepped in to care for Lori. Her godmother, Daisy Garcia, spent long hours with her, and Brooklyn shouldered much of the responsibility. At one point, Child Protective Services even removed Lori from Miranda's home and placed her with her great-grandfather. That arrangement was temporary, and she was later returned to Miranda, but the pattern of instability continued. Lori spent much of her childhood in Nashville, Tennessee, where Miranda relocated frequently in search of work. Each move meant a new school, a new adjustment, and the loss of any sense of permanence. And in Nashville, Lori's frustration sometimes boiled over. Records from the Youth Services and Runaway Bureau showed that she ran away at least once after a fight with her mother, but she returned the same day. Neighbors later recalled explosive arguments between Miranda and Lori, with Miranda's partner, LaTana White, admitting that she often tried to stay out of the screaming matches that erupted in the home. Through it all, Lori was described as bright, but she was also carrying resentment. She felt abandoned by her mother, and relatives worried she was capable of harming herself. Yet she still had ties to friends and extended family in Nashville. And in her own way, she tried to hold on to the pieces of stability she did have. By 2021, Andrew had re-established contact with his daughter. custody became split, but because he lived in Tallahassee, Florida, their time together was limited to summer visits. That changed the following year when Miranda, overwhelmed by her financial situation and constant moving, told Lorie she would not be picking her up at the end of the summer. She said she could no longer afford rent and didn't have a stable place for Lorie to live, and she believed the constant relocations were harming her daughter's education. So Lorie stayed in Florida with her father, and Miranda signed over custody to Andrew before the 2022 to 2023 school year. For Lorie, the move was painful. She may not have had a close relationship with her mother, but she had friends, routines, and familiar surroundings in Nashville. Leaving that behind for Tallahassee was something she never truly accepted. Andrew enrolled her at Griffin Middle School and told her she would make new friends, but Lorie remained shy and withdrawn. Teachers noticed she avoided extracurricular activities, and classmates later said it was difficult to stay in touch with her after school. She didn't use social media, she wasn't allowed to keep a phone, and she seemed to retreat into herself. So by the time she began her new life in Tallahassee, Lorie was carrying more than just the ordinary struggles of adolescence. She carried years of neglect, disrupted schooling, frequent moves, and a deep reluctance to start over again. And while her father promised her stability, the reality was that Lorie entered this next chapter already vulnerable, already isolated, and already unsure of where she truly belonged. At Griffin Middle School in Tallahassee, the signs that Lorie was struggling became increasingly difficult to ignore. She had entered a new environment where she hardly knew anyone, and while her teachers described her as shy and withdrawn, they also began noticing behaviors that raised concern. Nathan George, one of her teachers, remembered how she slipped him a note asking if he liked her. It was a small act, but it was out of place for a 12-year-old who had always kept to herself, and it immediately suggested that Lorie was searching for affirmation in ways that were not typical for her age. And it wasn't just the note. She would sometimes break down without warning, crying in the middle of class, unable to explain what had triggered the reaction. On other days, her emotions turned in the opposite direction. She flew into fits of anger, throwing objects across the room, leaving her teachers startled and unsure how to calm her down. These outbursts were not simply about misbehavior. They hinted at something deeper, something troubling that was pressing on Lorie beneath the surface. So the school counselor, Lisa Britt, was brought in. She conducted an interview with Lorie, asking her questions about her home life, her feelings, and her sense of self. She also administered a personality assessment. The results pointed toward depression and feelings of inadequacy. Lorie seemed to believe she wasn't good enough, that she lacked worth, and the counselor recognized these were not fleeting adolescent moods, but signs of something sustained and serious. However, what Lorie told her friends may have revealed even more. In conversations between classes, she confided that life at home with her father had grown harsh and at times violent. She said she was being mistreated, and that discipline often came in the form of a belt. One classmate recalled Lorie mentioning that her father had approached her at the bus stop carrying a belt in his hand, a detail that left her peers unsettled even if they hadn't seen the full incident themselves. These disclosures added weight to the emotional volatility her teachers were observing. Then came May of 2023, when the tension in Lorie's home life seemed to spill over completely. After a heated fight with Andrew, she ran away. She didn't disappear for long. She first went to a friend's house, stayed there briefly, and then turned up at school later that same day. But the event left a mark. It confirmed what teachers already suspected. Lorie was not just battling inner turmoil, she was also desperate to escape from her immediate environment, and her strained relationship with her parents only made matters worse. While she was now living full-time with Andrew, she still tried to keep a line open to her mother, Miranda. But Andrew blocked her calls and limited their communication to emails sent through a school computer. For a girl already struggling with feelings of abandonment and depression, this restriction deepened her isolation. So, although Miranda and Andrew constantly accused each other of being the irresponsible parent, the one thing that remained clear was that Lorie was caught between them, with neither side providing the consistent care she desperately needed. And as the school year edged toward its end, the red flags surrounding Lorie were no longer subtle. They were bright, unmistakable signals of a child in crisis, signals that would soon intersect with events far more alarming than anyone at Griffin Middle School could have imagined. So on the morning of June 3, 2023, the Tallahassee Police Department received a 911 call from Andrew Wiley. His voice was steady but carried the urgency of a parent reporting a child missing. Officer Caleb Babb was dispatched to the address at 1229 Continental Court, where Andrew explained what he said had happened the night before. According to Andrew, he had left home for work at around 11 p.m. on June 2nd. When he returned the next morning, he said his daughter was gone. Lori's backpack was missing, and he believed she had slipped out sometime during the night while he was away. He told the officer that when he had last seen her, she was sitting on the couch watching television, and he insisted they had spent most of the day together before he left for his shift. But Andrew didn't stop there. He reminded police that Lorie had already tried to run away once in May, after a heated fight between the two of them. He also mentioned what he called a distressing meeting she had recently had with her mother, Miranda White, claiming that the conversation had upset Lorie enough to alter her behavior. He painted a picture of a troubled child, easily rattled and capable of slipping away on her own. So, investigators began treating Lori's disappearance as a potential runaway case. The first hours were critical, and officers canvassed the neighborhood, checked with nearby schools, and spoke to her classmates. Flyers were circulated almost immediately, and the community was asked to keep their eyes open for the 12-year-old girl. And the community did respond. Pastor Rudy Ferguson of the New Birth Tabernacle of Praise, a local leader who didn't know Lorie personally, felt compelled to step in. He forwarded Lori's missing person bulletin to the Frontline Pastors Action Council, a network of more than 24 church leaders in the area.
After 14 days, there has to be at least one adult who has seen her or has an idea where she may have gone.
Lorie is considered a missing runaway and was last seen on June 3rd near the 1200 block of Continental Court, which is close to Ocala Road and less than a mile away from Mission San Luis. Rudy Ferguson, pastor for New Birth Tabernacle of Praise in Griffin Heights, doesn't know Lorie personally, but he says in his position it's important to help the community any way he can.
We ought to be her family. We ought to look for her consistently until she's safe and sound. I think it's incumbent upon the churches as well in the neighborhood because that's why we're there. We're in the community not just for spiritual growth, but also to be a voice.
Summers says Lorie has run away before, but she's always been found within a few days.
I'm hoping that if nothing else, that Lorie will come to the school. She knows she's safe there. She knows that people care about her there. And we're in summer school, so she can come there any day, Monday through Thursday.
Pastor Ferguson forwarded Lori's missing person bulletin to the Frontline Pastors Action Council, which is made up of about 26 pastors.
We're going to keep searching. We're going to keep making phone calls. We're going to keep putting her bulletin out there. We're going to keep doing it until she's safe and sound, until we have some type of results.
Summers says Lori's teachers and friends are concerned, and they're just hoping she'll come back.
If we can find Lorie, we can hopefully find her a mentor, so next time she faces struggles, she can talk to her mentor and not feel like she has to run away.
And her message for Lorie if she's watching.
Lorie, you're a great student and a great kid, and there's nothing that you haven't done well enough. Just come back.
As days stretched into weeks, speculation spread, and with it came rumors. Students whispered to each other that Lorie might have been killed and that her body could be found near the airport. Investigators chased every lead, but none of these stories held up. Lorie remained missing, and the unease only deepened. Then, in August of 2023, Miranda White posted something on Facebook that drew immediate attention. The message was short and cryptic, written beneath a broken heart emoji. "My baby is gone." However, within hours, she deleted it, but not before investigators noticed. When questioned, Miranda explained that she hadn't meant to confirm her daughter's death. Instead, she said it was her way of expressing the feeling that Lorie was no longer with her, and that deep down she believed her daughter might already be gone. Through the summer of 2023, the Tallahassee Police Department poured its energy into the case. Detectives followed hundreds of leads, many of them stretching across state lines, and they coordinated with agencies from Georgia to Tennessee. But none of those leads brought Lorie home. Each search ended without results, and the more time passed, the more investigators began to notice troubling details closer to home.
I'm feeling discouraged. Just to not know anything for 8 months feels like too long.
Margaret Summers says the days grow longer knowing that 12-year-old Lori Paige is still missing after nearly 8 months.
Every kid matters. And if she just disappeared and nobody knew about it, wouldn't that say she doesn't matter? She does matter, and she's going to continue to matter. And here we are 8 months later. We haven't stopped looking, We're not gonna stop looking.
Tuesday, about 90 people between Tallahassee Police and Fire Department searched 64 acres of Mission San Luis Park. TPD says Paige was last seen in the general area near Continental Court off Ocala Road.
Our concern grows day by day. We want to be able to bring Lorie home and reunite her with her family and friends. When you have this amount of time that goes by, our concern always increases, but we've really been concerned since day one.
Alicia Hill with the police department says this is their 5th search since Paige was originally reported missing last summer.
But the reality is there's so much that goes on behind the scenes, so much investigative work. Even with a minimal digital footprint, we still have to comb through evidence online.
And as the search continues, Summers remembers Paige as one of her brightest students.
She was more into school, more so than any other kid that I dealt with. We are supposed to go out of our way to make the kids feel important, but the way she always beelined over to me made me feel important.
However, one of the first red flags came from Andrew Wiley himself. Detectives noted that his demeanor seemed unusually flat, even when confronted with the possibility that his daughter might no longer be alive. For a parent whose child had been missing for weeks, his lack of visible concern felt off. He appeared calm, detached, and almost unmoved, which struck officers as inconsistent with the gravity of the situation. But suspicion wasn't directed at Andrew alone. Lori's mother, Miranda White, was also scrutinized. Investigators requested a standard cheek swab for DNA comparison, but Miranda refused not once, not twice, but 3 separate times before finally complying. Her reluctance drew attention, but when her phone records were analyzed, they confirmed she had been in the Nashville area at the time Lorie disappeared. Those records effectively cleared her as a suspect, even if her earlier hesitation left investigators frustrated. So attention returned to Andrew, and with it came the discovery of inconsistencies in his own timeline. Records showed that in the days leading up to Lorie's disappearance, Andrew had called in sick to work twice, once on May 27th and again on May 29th. His explanation for those absences was vague, and when investigators pressed him for details about what he had done with that time, his answers shifted. It became harder for detectives to trust the consistency of his account. Then came another red flag: Andrew's unexplained trip to Jacksonville. Geolocation data placed him in the area around the time Lorie went missing, which contradicted the picture he had painted of an uneventful routine. When asked why he had traveled there, Andrew gave an explanation that immediately raised eyebrows. He said he had driven a friend, someone named Tim Brown, to the airport. But when investigators tried to follow up, they ran into a wall. They couldn't locate anyone by that name connected to Andrew. His own relatives, including his brother Antoine, said they had never heard of a Tim Brown. Later, police did identify an acquaintance named Tim, but he confirmed that he had never been dropped off at Jacksonville International Airport. The story simply didn't hold up, and it left Andrew looking even less credible. As detectives pressed harder, they also drew in family members for support. At one point, they asked Lori's grandmother, Lori Paige, to call Andrew while investigators listened in. The hope was that a candid conversation might reveal something new about Lori's disappearance. But instead of focusing on his missing daughter, Andrew steered the conversation back toward himself. Brooklyn tried to talk about Lorie, about decorating her room for her upcoming birthday, about how deeply everyone missed her, but Andrew deflected. He spoke instead about his frustrations, his anxiety, and how upset he was at being treated as a suspect. To the investigators listening in, it felt like another moment where his priorities were not where they should have been. The investigation was no longer just about a missing girl. It was becoming, piece by piece, an inquiry into whether her father had been telling the truth at all. By early 2024, investigators knew that the only way forward was to go deeper into Andrew Wiley's digital footprint. So on February 2nd, detectives executed a search warrant at his residence and seized his phone, along with several electronic devices. What they found inside those devices began to unravel the story Andrew had been repeating for months. A forensic sweep uncovered disturbing internet searches that dated back to the very days surrounding Lori's disappearance. He had typed in phrases like bodies of water, Alabama, Georgia, and Apalachicola National Forest dead body. He even searched, where do police look for missing kids? Each query added weight to the suspicion that Andrew wasn't a desperate father trying to find his daughter, but a man planning how to conceal what he had already done. And the phone wasn't the only source of concern. investigators turned to Andrew's Dodge Charger, and the vehicle told its own story. During a forensic search, officers found a pistol and ammunition tucked inside, but what truly caught their attention was a bottle of cleaning spray. Its label specifically advertised its ability to remove blood, and in a case involving a missing child, that detail carried chilling implications. Even stranger, the factory-issued floor mats that should have been inside the vehicle were missing altogether. So the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Crime Lab was brought in, and samples from the Charger's carpet were sent for testing. The results confirmed what detectives feared. Lori Paige's blood was embedded in the fibers. It was no longer just suspicion or circumstantial evidence. It was physical proof that something violent had happened inside her father's car. Meanwhile, technicians worked to recover data from Andrew's other devices. He had attempted to erase his digital trail by factory resetting old phones and laptops, but experts were able to restore fragments of what he had tried to conceal. Among the recovered information were more searches about remote wooded areas in Alabama and Georgia, reinforcing the idea that Andrew had been scouting places to abandon his daughter's remains. And then came the financial evidence. Investigators traced Andrew's credit card purchases in the days before Lori disappeared, and one of those transactions raised new alarms. Records showed that he had purchased contraceptives, specifically Plan B. This fueled suspicions that his abuse of Lori might have been sexual in nature, and that he had been preparing for the consequences of what he had done. So by the spring of 2024, detectives were holding a collection of evidence that shifted the case from speculation to substance. However, the story wasn't finished. Each new discovery didn't just answer questions, it raised new ones. If Andrew had gone so far to erase his tracks, what exactly had happened to Lori in those final days of May and early June 2023? And where had he taken her after she vanished from her home? Those questions would push investigators back into the fields and woods of South Georgia, where the most important breakthrough was still waiting to be found. Based on digital evidence recovered from Andrew's devices, detectives turned their attention to South Georgia. In particular, one location stood out, a remote, brush-covered stretch of land in Thomas County, known locally as a plantation. It was rugged terrain, thick with undergrowth, and the kind of place someone might choose if they wanted something hidden and left undisturbed. So in early 2024, search teams moved in. They brought dogs, forensic experts, and community volunteers. They combed through the plantation in multiple sweeps, guided by location data from Andrew's phone, which had pinged in the area around the time Lori disappeared. But despite days of work, nothing surfaced. The ground was too dense, the brush too heavy, and the evidence, if it was there, stayed buried. Then, more than a year later, the land itself provided the break that investigators needed. On April 5, 2025, a prescribed burn was carried out on the property. Flames cleared away the thick, tangled brush that had hidden the ground for so long. And when detectives returned to the site, they finally saw what had been there all along. Scattered in the ash and soil were skeletal remains. The discovery halted everything. For nearly 2 years, Lori Paige had been listed as missing, her story trapped in uncertainty. But now, with the remains found in the same area Andrew's phone had tracked to, the search had given way to a recovery. The remains were sent to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for processing. And on April 11, 2025, the results came back. The DNA confirmed what investigators had both expected and dreaded. The bones belonged to 12-year-old Lori Paige. So after 22 months of searching, Lori's disappearance was no longer a mystery. She had not run away. She had not vanished into the night on her own. Her body had been abandoned in a Georgia field, left to weather time and nature until the fire cleared the brush away. And with that confirmation, the investigation turned from searching for a child to holding her father accountable for what had been done to her.
2 years ago, we would never give up. I told you 2 years ago we would find Lori and we would bring her home. I told you 2 years ago that we would find who did this and we would arrest them and bring them to justice. And today I stand before you to tell you we have done just that. So we have recovered Lori's remains and we have arrested the person responsible for this crime. So today with me is this group of amazing people that have been working with us nonstop on this investigation. It could not have come to the conclusion that it came to without this type of collaboration. So I'm going to take just a minute to thank each of them. State Attorney Jack Campbell couldn't be here with us today, but certainly they have played and will continue to play an incredibly valuable role in it. The Florida Department of Law Enforcement, again, just an essential partner. Assistant Commissioner Pollard, thank you, sir, for everything that you guys do. SAC Wilmer and ASAC Willis, thank you guys. Again, just amazing. Jennifer Camp is the lab supervisor who, again, the evidence that we found, they turned it around in 4 days. And again, that just doesn't typically happen, but that's the kind of collaboration that everybody put into this case. Nobody gave up on this case. And
when investigators pieced together the physical evidence, the digital trail, and Andrew Wiley's behavior, the question of why became unavoidable. Prosecutors believed the answer was darker than anyone had anticipated. Court records suggested that Lorie had been subjected to abuse, and not just physical discipline. Investigators uncovered purchases and searches that pointed toward SA and possibly even a pregnancy. It was a possibility that explained why Andrew might have turned against his daughter in those final days. So, when State Attorney Jack Campbell addressed the case publicly, he did not shy away from the disturbing implications. He said plainly, "We had evidence of the fact that he was seeking out what's called Plan B, which is an abortion drug." The timing of that purchase aligned closely with Lorie's disappearance, and it reinforced the belief that Andrew had been covering up more than just a crime of anger. Then there was the matter of his medical history. Around the time Lorie vanished, Andrew sought treatment for a sexually transmitted disease. But when doctors attempted to perform a full examination, he refused. Prosecutors later argued that this refusal was another attempt to avoid leaving behind evidence, because treatment records might have revealed more than just his own illness. So the theory prosecutors built was chilling in its simplicity. They believed Andrew killed Lorie on June 1st, 2023, in a moment driven by both fear and self-preservation. They believed he disposed of her body the very next day in the Thomas County plantation field, and then on June 3rd he picked up the phone and reported her missing, presenting himself as the concerned father. By the spring of 2025, with Lorie's remains identified and the trail of evidence secured, Andrew Wiley was formally charged. The count was second-degree murder, a charge that acknowledged the killing was intentional but not premeditated in the legal sense. And while the charge would never bring Lorie back, it marked the point when the story of her disappearance officially became the story of her murder.
after a comprehensive and exhaustive 22-month investigation into the disappearance of 12-year-old Lori Paige, the Tallahassee Police Department has arrested her father, 36-year-old Andrew Wiley, on the charges of second-degree murder. Since Lori's disappearance in June of 2023, detectives have pursued hundreds of leads, conducted interviews across multiple states, examined digital evidence, and searched extensively across North Florida and South Georgia. The case evolved significantly over time, with key developments ultimately leading to Wiley's arrest. The following provides an overview of the timeline of events that we followed. June 3rd, 2023. Lori Paige is reporting missing by her father, Andrew Wiley, and at that time, he claimed she left home with her backpack sometime in the night while he was at work. Summer of 2023 to early 2024, detectives pursued hundreds of leads across state lines. Lorie is never located, and the story provided by Wiley begins to show inconsistencies. February 2nd, 2024, a phone is seized from Wiley's residence. A forensic analysis uncovers questionable internet searches, including queries about remote areas with bodies of water in Alabama and Georgia. March 2024, as more consistencies in Wiley's statements are identified and new information about his relationship with Lorie emerges, detectives shift their focus more heavily towards Wiley. Early 2024, based on digital evidence, detectives begin searching a remote, brush-covered area of Thomas County, Georgia, known locally as the plantation. Multiple searches are conducted but yield no results. April 5th, 2025, following a prescribed burn that cleared heavy brush in the area, detectives returned to the plantation for another search. This time, they located human remains. The remains are processed by the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, again, like I said, in 4 days, and positively identified as those of Lori Paige. This case has deeply impacted our community for nearly 2 years. Lori deserves a safe home and a full life. While today's arrest will never bring her back, it does bring us one step closer to justice.
So, on April 11th, 2025, nearly 2 years after Lori Paige was first reported missing, Andrew Wiley was arrested. Detectives who had worked the case from the beginning finally placed him in custody, and the community that had been living in limbo now saw the first clear sign that justice might be on the horizon. Then, less than 24 hours later, he appeared before Judge Anthony Miller. The courtroom was quiet as the charges were read, but the judge wasted no time making his position clear. Bond was denied, and Wiley was ordered to remain in custody while awaiting trial. Judge Miller also granted the prosecution's request to bar him from contacting several members of Lori's family, citing the potential for intimidation and conflict. But even within that family, the case was already causing deep divisions. While prosecutors laid out what they believed was overwhelming evidence, Wiley's brother, Antoine, took a different stance. He launched a GoFundMe campaign claiming Andrew was innocent and that the police had targeted the wrong man. The fundraiser sought more than $100,000 to pay for a defense, though the platform eventually removed it because of its policies against funding violent crime defenses. Still, the effort underscored how fractured the family had become. Prosecutors, however, remained confident. They had Lori's blood in Andrew's car carpet, internet searches that matched the disposal site, and phone records that traced his movements into Thomas County on the exact days Lori disappeared. And beyond the forensic evidence, they had a motive that prosecutors argued made sense of the entire timeline: the fear of exposure after asexual ab-star-C, the possibility of a pregnancy, and the panic that followed. However, on June 19, 2025, just weeks after his arrest, Andrew Wiley's case took a sudden and irreversible turn. While being held in the Leon County Detention Facility, he collapsed without warning. Staff rushed him to the medical unit, and for several minutes, officers and medical personnel attempted life-saving measures. Then, on June 20th, he was pronounced dead. The cause, according to the coroner, was a pulmonary embolism, a blood clot that had traveled to his lungs. Officials described it as a natural death, not the result of foul play or violence.
We were here for an unrelated story when we saw, literally just past those gates, multiple fire trucks. That was a bit unusual, but there are some 1,000 detainees at any given time. When we asked, though, we learned of a surprising end to a long-running case. Police say Andrew Wiley killed his daughter, Lori Paige, and dumped her remains at a plantation in rural Georgia. He'll never face those allegations in court, though, after he died from a pulmonary embolism while at the Leon County Detention Facility, according to a preliminary autopsy report provided by the Leon County Sheriff's Office.
However, Andrew's sudden passing meant that the criminal process, which had taken nearly 2 years to build, would never reach its conclusion. There would be no trial, no cross-examination, no chance for a jury to weigh the mountain of digital evidence, forensic results, and prosecutorial arguments. And because the case ended without conviction, the court could not formally declare him guilty. So the file was closed, and the pursuit of justice that had driven investigators, prosecutors, and Lori's community was cut short. For many, it felt like the final chapter had been written too soon, leaving behind more questions than answers and denying Lori's family the closure of a courtroom verdict. In the weeks after Andrew Wiley's death, Tallahassee turned its focus back to Lori Paige. Candlelight vigils were held in her honor, and one gathering at the amphitheater stood out. Community members were given candles and small bottles of bubbles, and as Michael Jackson's Human Nature played softly in the background, people lit their candles and released bubbles into the night sky. It was a simple gesture, but it carried weight, a way to remember a girl who had spent her short life searching for stability and love.
Murder. As the community grieves this tragic loss, Dozens of neighbors gathered at Cascades Park for a bubble-blowing event and candlelight vigil to honor Lori's memory. Margaret Summers, a paraprofessional who worked with Lori's class, says the community remained hopeful as TPD continued the search for Lori.
I think that at the beginning she was thought to be a runaway, and I think that initially based on that the ball was dropped. But once TPD picked up the ball, they ran with it, and they ran with that ball all the way to the...
Pastor Rudy Ferguson, who had mobilized churches during the earliest days of Lori's disappearance, spoke again to the community. His words were both somber and sharp. The way she was found ought to be in our memories for the rest of our lives. He reminded people that closure was not the same as justice, and that Lori's story demanded vigilance from everyone who called the city home.
Murder. As the community grieves this tragic loss, dozens of neighbors gathered at Cascades Park for a bubble-blowing event and candlelight vigil to honor Lori's memory. Margaret Summers, a paraprofessional who worked with Lori's class, says the community remained hopeful as TPD continued the search for Lori.
I think that at the beginning she was thought to be a runaway, and I think that initially based on that the ball was dropped. But once TPD picked up the ball, they ran with it, and they ran with that ball all the way to the woods in Georgia.
Neighbor Pastor Rudy Ferguson attended tonight's vigil. He says it's a first step towards healing the community.
It's also my way of healing as well, because we have been looking for a long time. And even though we got the news that we didn't hope for, we got the answer that started the process of closure. And this was it.
This was organized by someone with no connection to Lori without participation from her other family. Ferguson says he, along with a group of pastors and the family, is planning a...
So the story of Lori Paige closed not with justice in a courtroom, but with candles, bubbles, and reflections. She was a bright, shy, self-sufficient girl who had been failed by the people around her. She deserved safety and stability. Instead, her life ended in neglect, betrayal, and unanswered questions. So what do you think about this case? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. We really do read every single one. And if you found this story as unsettling as we did, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more true crime cases told in full detail. Until next time, stay safe.